Hello and welcome to Cross the Line, questions for the 19th National Congress of the CPC. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. For our viewers both at home and abroad, the upcoming 19th National Congress of the CPC is no doubt an event of myths that evokes a lot of curiosity. To appease that curiosity, I'll be joined by our outstanding overseas correspondents to co-host the show. They'll bring us questions and perceptions of the event from a 100% foreign angle. To answer these questions and interpret these perceptions, we are joined in the Beijing studio today by Victor Gao Zhikai, Director of the China National Association for International Studies. And in Kuala Lumpur, our co-host Ryan Mausel can't wait to tell us what questions he's going to raise for this edition of the Cross the Line.
Thanks, Yang Rui. It's a pleasure to be able to co-host Cross the Line with you. The major question that I have ahead of the upcoming 19th National Congress of the CPC is just how firm a footing is China's economy on, or is it headed for some kind of crisis, as some people contend? I'm Ryan Meltzer in Kuala Lumpur. Malaysians have more reason than most to hope that China is not headed for some kind of economic crisis and maintains its strong growth. China has been Malaysia's #1 trading partner for the past 8 years or so, and has also emerged as its #1 foreign investor. I asked some Malaysians how concerned or optimistic they are about China's economic prospects.
This China will collapse, this hypothesis have been talking for about 10 years, and every time proven is wrong. And I think it will be proven wrong again because with their very creative idea, hardworking, highly educated China population now, I think it's not true that they are going to collapse.
I think I'm generally very optimistic about how China's economy is going to move forward. There are perhaps some concerns about the property sector, about a possible property bubble. But other than that, I think we see good figures coming out of China. Production index seems to be doing well. The exports from China continues to be quite strong, and China has still been importing a lot of things from the ASEAN countries. So as far as we look at it, I think we are generally quite optimistic about China.
It is significant that China appears to have now ironically emerged as the leader for the movement for free trade and for sustainable development. The US, under Donald Trump, appears to have basically abdicated this role.
There is perhaps some concern about the currency, about renminbi, with the possible strengthening of the US dollar.
The International Monetary Fund recently argued that China's debt to GDP ratio could rise by more than 300% by the year 2030. On the other, it has also been forecasted that China could lose as much as 80 million working age people by that same year. So the question is, what are Chinese leaders, what are its policymakers doing to address these issues?
How China is going to tackle the concern and worry of all these local people when they talk about a One Belt, One Road initiative. Because whether people perceive it that they are true to fulfill that, it is a benefit for everyone, mutual benefit.
So certainly no concerns that China's on the brink of some kind of economic crisis, and quite an optimistic assessment of the country's economic prospects. At the same time, there is an acknowledgement of some of the key challenges China's policymakers will face to ensure that China's growth remains both robust and sustainable. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
Thank you, Ryan, for bringing us these questions and perceptions from overseas. Victor, it seems public opinions are quite divided across the broad spectrum as to where we are headed for. For example, there are those who believe that we have not only the high debt ratio at the local level, a lot of overcapacity, and bubbles certainly in the real estate market. On the other hand, however, look at RMB, which is appreciating against the US dollar, and our foreign exchange reserve is increasing steadily. So if you make a comparison between these two opposites across the spectrum, are you optimistic or cautiously pessimistic about the prospects of the Chinese economy before the 19th National Congress of the CPC?
I'm personally very cautiously optimistic about the trend of the Chinese economic development, both for the short term as well as for the medium and longer term. China by now is already the second largest economy and has been achieving about 6.5% GDP growth for the recent couple of years. And this, compared with European countries, Japan, United States, is really a very, very important growth rate. And I would say that the Chinese economy is far from running out of growth stories in China. And then this One Belt, One Road initiative will really enable the Chinese companies, the Chinese entrepreneurs, etc., to really embark upon a very new growth paradigm, which will bring economic benefits not only to China, but all those countries participate in the initiative. Therefore, I would say the Chinese economy, despite of all the problems and the need to complete the transition at this moment, is still on very solid ground. And compared with other more developed countries, its growth potential is huge.
In the package, our co-host Ryan does mention that China seems to have emerged as the leader of the movement for free trade and investment. Look at what President Xi Jinping said in his policy speech at the Winter Davos. This occurred when President Trump vowed to beat retreat from TPP and TTIP. Therefore, do you believe China stands ready to lead a free trade and investment movement across the world?
Well, indeed, by now, the United States under President Donald Trump is really taking a very, very contrarian approach to globalization and free trade. And I think it probably will take some time for the United States to pick up its acts together and rethink about what's the better approach for its engagement with the rest of the world. This leaves China, the second largest economy by official exchange rates and the largest economy by purchasing power parity, to be really in the leading position, either by its own will or by default. Therefore, I think President Xi Jinping and the Chinese government are talking the right talk and also walk the right walk in championing for free trade and the new version of globalization. In today's world, no country can benefit by hiding behind national walls and seeking protectionism as a method to stimulate its economic growth.
Now,
eventually, the megatrend is still free trade and globalization.
Now, Victor, let's take a closer look at some of the case studies. For example, Belt and Road Initiative, as well as the just concluded BRICS Summit in Xiamen, the coastal city in southeastern China. Now, it seems Xi Jinping, our president, emphasized overwhelmingly the importance of a rebalancing globalization. Now, the wording may vary from person to person, from case to case. For example, some would prefer to say this is a process of reglobalization, the other would say it's a deglobalization. Now, whatever the wording, what role would China play and in what direction would China lead the bloc of BRICS as well as countries along the stretches of the Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, China is in a very unusual and unique position. China itself is still a developing country. It's an emerging economy. However, China, by the sheer size of its economy and by the sheer additional growth rate, for example, over the past several years and also forecasting into the future, is the leading contributor to GDP growth on the global stage. Therefore, I think, and China is also the largest trading nation in the world, the largest trading nation in the world. Therefore, we are faced with a situation where the leading country contributing the most importantly to the global GDP growth is actually a developing country, an emerging market. And this is why China emphasized that the developing countries, the emerging markets, need to be better recognized because of their increasing weight in the global economy, play a better role, not only in terms of trade and economic development, but also in rule setting on the global stage.
Pretty articulate. Thank you, Victor. China may be facing a labor shortage as early as 2021 due to a rapidly aging population and a very draconian one-child policy that has been practiced for decades since the opening up. Now, so much for this part of the discussion, Ryan. I hope our discussion in Beijing has at least partly answered the question you have raised in the beginning. Tell us your thoughts and any more questions you want to ask Victor, Ryan?
Yes, thanks very much, Yang Rui. Yes, Victor, I was wondering about the regional comprehensive economic partnership that China is negotiating with ASEAN, the other East Asian countries, India and others. Now, the benefits to a small economy like Malaysia's are very clear, but what kind of benefits do you think RCEP can bring to China's economy?
Oh, definitely. I think with the killing of TPP and with the increasing trend of anti-globalization by certain leading economies in the world, it is increasingly important for countries in Asian Pacific region, including countries, for example, to come up with a new way of promoting free trade and globalization. And I would say RCEP is right there, is a better model, is a good alternative, and countries like Malaysia can be more engaged with the rest of this large group by increasing their trade volume, by having a premium for their exports, for example, and also by bringing in more investments to beef up in activity. And I think the recent big announcement for building up the Eastern Coast railway link in Malaysia is a typical example, because I think by more engaged with the rest of the world and rest of the region, Malaysia can definitely achieve a better way of development, and greater connectivity will enable Malaysia to benefit more in terms of increased efficiency and productivity for the people, for the corporates, as well as for the country as a whole.
Now, Victor, I've been speaking with Chinese manufacturers that have set up operations here in Malaysia, and to my surprise, some of them have said that actually the costs of manufacturing and setting up here in Malaysia are now lower than they are in China. So I'm wondering how China's policymakers and industry, what they need to do to adapt to these rising costs in China.
Well, indeed, I would not be surprised if China eventually becomes a key investor in the rest of the world, including in particular the ASEAN countries and in particular countries like Malaysia, to transfer technologies and also manufacturing capacities to these regions. And I would say the Malaysian economy and the Chinese economy are highly complementary to each other, and there is good tradition of friendship and good neighborliness between the two countries. And it will not be surprising if more Chinese companies want to set up manufacturing capacities in Malaysia, not only by leveraging off on all the resources available in Malaysia, but also using Malaysia as a springboard in selling their goods and products to other parts in this particular region. And it will not be surprising, for example, if goods manufactured in Malaysia can be further shipped southward to reach markets in Australia. So it will be a more interconnected regional manufacturing paradigm, which will benefit Malaysia in the long term.
Some excellent insights and perspectives answering the questions that I raised and that the people I interviewed in Kuala Lumpur raised. Thank you very much for that, gentlemen.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Victor, for your participation. One question answered and more questions to come in our Cross the Line. Questions for the 19th National Congress of the CPC Special Series. Want to know more about the next question, what it will be and who will raise it from where? Please stay tuned for our next episode of Cross the Line, questions for the 19th National Congress of the CPC Special Series. Hello, welcome to Cross the Line, questions for the 19th National Congress of the CPC. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. For our viewers, both at home and abroad, the upcoming 19th National Congress of the CPC is no doubt an event of myth that invokes a lot of curiosity. To appease that curiosity, I'll be joined by our outstanding overseas correspondents to co-host the show. They'll bring us questions and perceptions of the event from a 100% full. To answer these questions and interpret these perceptions, we are joined in our Beijing studio today by Victor Gao Zhikai, Director of the China National Association for International Studies, and in Tokyo, our co-host Terence Terashima can't wait to tell us what questions he's going to raise for this edition of the Cross the Line.
Yes, thank you, Yang Rui. It's a great pleasure to co-host Across the Line with you. There are a lot of questions in my mind, but the major question I want to raise about the upcoming 19th Congress of the CPC is how will China's economic transformation affect the world economy? I'm now in Ginza district. This was once a symbol of Japan's economic strength during its bubble era. Japan played its role, but now China has overtaken Japan and became the second largest economy and plays an important role to the global economy. The global economy now stands at the crossroad and needs a good catalyst for sustainable economic growth. I'm going to have a chat with an economist how the direction of Chinese economy will affect the direction of the global economy. Toshiya Tsugami has been following the Chinese economy closely.
In the past decade, Chinese economy has certainly been the driving forces of the global economic growth. If there is any sharp slowdown in Chinese economy, that will bring about a major economic impact for the global economy. And I think this fact certainly will give a big pressure for Chinese top leaders. As Japan's Prime Minister, Mr. Abe, recently told, the Road and Belt Initiative, I think it's a good idea for the global economy. And there is a certain value in aiming at these directions. But then, in my view, Chinese government should not be too hurried in chasing speed or volume of the individual products. Otherwise, there will be a bunch of non-performing loans and non-performing projects and so on, which will lead to an early over of the entire programs. So patience is necessary.
During the conversation, there were a number of points raised: China's economic health, economic partnerships, investments, etc. So the question of interest will be, how would China maneuver through the changing tides and steer its economy for a steady growth whilst becoming the catalyst for global economic growth? Terence Terashima, CGTN, Tokyo.
Well, of course, we can clearly feel the pervasive pessimistic sentiments of our Japanese friends about being surpassed by the Chinese economy. We are now twice their economic size, but that's no reason for us to sit back complacently. Having said this, Victor, what do you think of the prospects of the Chinese economy? Do you think we're going to be the leading driving force for the rest of the world?
No, I think by now China's economy is already the leading engine for the growth of the global GDP. And the Chinese economy, being the largest manufacturing economy in the world and being the largest trading nation in the world, is leading the rest of the world.
But I'm afraid India is also quickly catching up. It's the fastest growing economy now.
Yes, we need to congratulate India for its great achievements. However, if we look at the overall size of the economy, the Chinese economy is about 5 times that of India. So it will take many, many years for India to really catch up to the size of the Chinese economy today. And
but they have a pretty large young labor force.
That's of course
be the very robust dividends they can boast of for years to come.
That's of course, to have a large young population is a plus on the condition that the economic growth can generate so many meaningful jobs for the younger generation.
And we are to enter into an aging society. China is becoming very old before we get rich, I'm afraid.
Indeed, the Chinese population growth is reaching a tipping point. However, I think the government decision to allow 2 kids for each couple, for example, and I personally believe very soon that probably the Chinese government need to make new amendment to the population policy. So hopefully, eventually, the new additional growth in the Chinese population can help normalize the population growth rather than being dragged down by this very low growth of childbirth in China.
Plus, we are well prepared for the advent of what we call the artificial intelligence era. And in that case, I'm afraid the labor force will not account for as much as what we have done for the economic growth. Now, how will China's Belt and Road Initiative reshape the world economy? Because we seem to have adopted a very different idea about how to navigate the world economy, unlike what the Americans have done, for example, rejecting the participation by emerging markets in IMF, although we did manage to survive their scrutiny by being listed as one of the major reserve currencies in the basket of the special drawing rights. But we clearly felt the reluctance of lawmakers in the DC. Having said this, China has put forward its bold and very ambitious vision about how to be more inclusive. Do you think we're going to make it happen?
Yes, I think the One Belt, One Road initiative is unprecedented in many important senses of the word. First of all, it's a regional and a global new development paradigm. Secondly, it very much emphasizes on connectivity through infrastructure, through connectivity, through financial connectivity, as well as cyber connectivity, for example. And all this will not be done within one country or between two countries. It will be done on a continental basis.
Do you believe we're going to repeat what happened in Japan? I'm talking about the lost decade, the Plaza Accord, and the stagnation of the Japanese economy for up to 2 decades. I mean, this is a tragedy.
The Japanese economy, even after lost a lot of its growth potential for several decades, remains the third largest economy in the world. And the Japanese economy still maintains a lot of advantages in many key aspects, especially in the high-tech sector. So
and
I
it's
think
overseas multinationals scattered throughout the whole world.
Absolutely. So I think from the Chinese perspective, we need to show our respect for the Japanese economy, even though the Chinese economy is about twice the size of the Japanese economy. And if Japan can really play it right, and Japan can find a way to engage with the One Belt, One Road initiative with AIIB, for example, rather than choose to disdain itself from them, then the Japanese economic growth can have new paradigms and new growth engines added to it. And I hope it will be a good thing for Japan, it will be a good thing for China, it will be a good thing for Asia-Pacific region, as well as for the global economy.
Thank you, Victor. So much for this part of the discussion with Victor in the Beijing studio. Terry, I hope our discussion here has at least partly answered the question you've raised in the beginning. Tell us your thoughts and any more questions you want to ask Victor.
Yes, thank you, Victor, and thank you, Angry. It was very interesting to hear these views, and I have actually a couple of questions for Victor. I want to delve more into some of the things that were discussed in the studio. First of all, the China's Belt and Road Initiative. Of course, there are various unique economic and political disparities in the region along the path. And how will these be addressed and monitored in coordination with participants and with the international financial institution?
Thank you very much for your very good question. Up to now, there are already about 100 countries which want to participate in this One Belt, One Road initiative. And 100 countries or so, they are very, very different. Many of them belong to developing countries. Many of them belong to developed countries. Some of the countries have very, very serious geopolitical problems or internal stability problems, etc. Therefore, I would say we need to deal with each of these participating countries in its own capacity. However, the more important thing is that the One Belt, One Road really looks at a much larger unit. For example, the Eurasian continent. For example, West Asia and North Africa as a whole. For example, Sub-Sahara region as a whole, etc. So I think the connectivity especially applies to these much larger geographical units in their own way. And each of these different countries, while they need to overcome their own challenges, can benefit from the much beefed up and strengthened connectivity projects for all these regions and for the One Belt, One Road initiative framework as a whole.
Just one more question. One mistake that Japan made during the economic growth is that they concentrated on the high growth and turned a blind eye to the debt issues, which cause ripple effects or bankruptcies here in Japan. How would China address the investments and debt issues in the future?
Well, for any particular company, for any particular economy, I think how to strive for a good balance between equity and debt and reduce the debt involvement, for example, controlling that at a rational level is a key challenge. And I would say for the One Belt, One Road initiative, it is indeed a big challenge for each of the participating companies, for each of the participating economies to be fully aware of the need to raise debt, but also the need to put the debt in a very appropriate proportion. Because otherwise, if the debt runs out of control, it will bury not only all the past economic achievements, but also probably would hinder the future economic growth potential. And I hope, for all the participating countries and for all those corporates which want to participate in the One Belt, One Road initiative, how to better manage the debt portfolio will be a key challenge. And in this sense, I think if we look at One Belt, One Road as a whole, especially on those major infrastructure connectivity projects, there will be a better way to deal with the debt problem.
Thank you, Victor and Yang Rui, for your views and perspectives. It was a very enlightening discussion for the questions I raised in the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. In fact, the Chinese authorities have adopted a fiscal austerity program to, for example, stem the outbound flight of capital. And some of the players in the non-public sector, for example, Wang Jianling, Guo Baochang, and Xu Jiayin, find it increasingly difficult to have loans. And that's a real challenge for the sustainability of the non-public sector. But again, thank you, Terry, and thank you, Victor, for your participation. One question answered and more to come in Across the Line. Questions for the 19th National Congress of the CPC Special Series. Want to know what the next question is and who will raise it from where? Please stay tuned for our next episode of Across the Line. Questions for the 19th National Congress of the CPC Special Series. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. Goodbye.